Okay, here from Dalum, I want to welcome all of you down in the south and in the western part. And today we will hear Camilla from Fokus tell us about the new recommendations on the feeding of the sows and their body conditions. And after that we'll have my colleague Anne will talk about the Backfat scanning, how to use it, and we have some new ideas how to use it and how to get a good overview of the sow unit. So I want to welcome you, Camilla. I look forward to hear your presentation, and to you down there, I have my phone open. You can chat here if you have any questions, and we will ask the speakers here up here. So, welcome.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So I'm Camilla, and I'm working at Fokus Innovation in the Department Nutrition and Feeding of pigs, and my focus is with the sow feeding. So today you will hear about two parts. The first part is focus on sow body condition, where you will hear about the background for the new recommendation of backfat thickness at farrowing, and new criteria for categorizing sows into skinny, normal, and fat at weaning. And then I will go through feeding curves also for gilts and feed management in gestation unit. The second part is focusing on development in sow and gilt body growth. I will go through maintenance requirement, importance of uniform gilts at first service, and the effect of feeding level and dietary lysine and protein concentration on sow body weight development. So you have probably heard that our new recommendation on sow backfat at farrowing is now 14 to 17 millimeter. And the background for this new recommendation is based on an analysis of existing data, where we combine data from 8 trials conducted from 2015 to 2021. And this would give us some information about sow productivity, given they had a specific backfat thickness at farrowing. We included 3,900 sows and litters, and there was first to fifth parity sows in this data. So what we saw was, here I have first a graph of sow body weight loss, and then next there will come a graph also with backfat loss during lactation, and in relation to the backfat thickness, which is shown on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, if I'm not correct. And we had sows with backfat thicknesses of 9 to 26 millimeter. And what we saw was that the sow body weight loss increased from around 8.5 kilo to 14.5 kilo when the backfat thickness increased from 9 to 26. So the more fat the sows were, the more body weight they lost. And this was the same when we looked at sow backfat loss. We saw that they lost 1.7 millimeter when they had a backfat thickness between 9 to 11 millimeter, and they had a backfat loss of almost 5 millimeter when they had up to 26 millimeter of backfat at farrowing. So what we can tell from this was that a lower backfat thickness at farrowing ensures a lower body weight loss in lactation. This indicates that more lean sows have a more stable body condition throughout the whole cycle. We also looked into stillborn piglets, and what we see was that the lower graph is for first and second parity sows. We know that these sows have less stillborn piglets, and the middle graph is for 3rd to 5th parity sows. They have a little bit more. And then the upper graph was for 5th parity sows. And what is interesting here is that sows, 5th parity sows with less than 13 millimeter of backfat, they had a risk of having more stillborn piglets. I know that there was, you cannot see from here, but I know that there was less sows in this category with the backfat below, but I still think that we should be focusing on not having sows with too low backfat, since it seems like there could be a risk of more stillborn piglets, at least in 5th parity sows. Then here we have a graph showing weaned piglets per litter. And again, in relation to sow backfat thickness at farrowing. So there is a curve that is predicted on all data, and then there is the dots, which is the mean values. And what we see was that in a very broad interval of 10 to 20 millimeter of backfat, sows weaned around 12.7, 12.8 piglets per litter. And it was first after 20 millimeter that weaned piglets per litter started to decrease, and a sow with 26 millimeter weaned on average 12.3 piglets per litter. So it seems like fat sows, they wean slightly less piglets per litter. Here we have a litter average daily gain. And we have two graphs. The lower one is for 1st parity sows, and the upper one is for 2nd to 5th parity sows. And what we saw was that the 1st parity sows, they had, again in a broad interval, this time from 12 to 20 millimeter, they had a litter average daily gain of 2.6 kilo per day. And the 2nd to 5th parity sows, they had a litter average daily gain of 3 kilo per day. So they were quite high producing in a broad interval, but it seems like skinny and fat sows had a lower average daily gain. This means below 12 and above 20. So with these colors on the bottom, I have shown that now we recommend 14 to 17 millimeter. And I put in this green area both on the bottom and on the graph to show you that why did we put our recommendations here is because it's more in the middle than the previous 16 to 19 millimeter. That would be more in the upper end of the optimal interval. And with the red and yellow color, I want to show that when you measure backfat, you will not get what you expect all the time. Sometimes you will move out of what you wanted to reach, and this chance is smaller if we put the wanted interval more in the middle than if we strive for example, 12 millimeter. Then there is a higher risk of sows getting too skinny. Or on the other hand, if we strive for sows with 18 millimeter, there is a risk of more sows getting too fat. And when you measure backfat, there is some variation both from person to person, and also do you find the exact same spot every time, and so on. And I want to say that you should still be aware of shoulder lesions. Previously, you said that the more skinnier sow you have, there may be a higher risk of shoulder lesions. So if you have specific problems in your herd with shoulder lesions, for example, or you could have a bad floor, which is rough, then you should, of course, rethink if you should strive for 14 or maybe 17 is better, so you ensure that they have enough backfat to be prepared for shoulder lesions. So when we change the backfat recommendation at farrowing, we also need to change our categorization of sows at weaning. So now we have sorry, I forgot to change the Danish words, but we have a skinny sow that is now 11 millimeter and below, and a sow in medium body condition, which now have 12 to 14 millimeter, and a fat sow, which now is 15 millimeter and above. So this is the basic for putting the sows on our recommended feeding curves in gestation. And the recommended feeding curves are the same as they were previously. It's only the backfat categories that have changed. So from day mating until day 30, a skinny sow should have 4.5 feed units per day. A sow in normal body condition should have 3 feed units per day, and a fat sow should have 2.5 feed units per day. And we believe that in this early gestation, the sows will be able to deposit most of the lost backfat, so that in mid-gestation from day 30 to 84, you could feed them all 2.3 feed units per day. But with the note that if a sow is still skinny, meaning that it has below 13 millimeter, then the sow should have a feed allowance of 3.5 feed units in mid-gestation until it has reached 14 millimeters, and then it should be able to feed the sow 2.3 again, and it will reach 14 to 17 millimeter at fairing. And we recommend for these sows to backfat scan again at day 30, so you don't need to feed them the high feeding curve all the way to day 84 if you can give them this. So in total, we expect that a sow that has followed the feeding curve for a skinny sow will deposit 4 to 5 millimeter of backfat in total, and a sow that has followed the normal feeding curve will deposit 2 to 3 millimeter, and a sow that was fat at weaning will deposit about 0 to 1 millimeter. So now that we feed or use the same feeding curves as previously, we can think about how do we then save some feed. And this I want to show with these graphs, where I have taken the 3,900 sows and categorized them according to the previous categorization and the new categorization. And the orange the orange curves, you can see previously more sows were fed on the high feeding curve, and less is now fed at the high feeding curve. And the same you will see for the green feeding curves. More was fed on this curve before than now, where more is fed on the low feeding curve to fat sows. So this means that the proportion that is getting less feed in early lactation is higher now than it was previously, and this will make an estimated saving of feed at 50 to 100 feed units feed units per sow per year. So the recommended feeding curves for gilts, we have to make sure that backfat thickness and body weight may not increase drastically during the first gestation. So gilts should be mated in second heat at an age of 220 to 240 days old, and at a weight of 140 to 160 kilo, and a backfat thickness of 13 to 15 millimeter. So the feeding curve in early gestation will depend on the size of the gilt. If the gilt weighs 140 kilo when it was mated, then give it 2.2 feed units per sow. If it was 160, you can give it 2.4. In mid-gestation, It will depend both on body condition, the back fat thickness at day 30. So you will need to measure the back fat thickness at day 30. And if you have a gilt that has 16 to 17 millimeter, it has always reached what was optimal for fairing. So you basically just want to, that it has minimal or no gain in back fat. So give it 2 to 2.1 feed units sow per day, dependent on the size. And if you want a moderate gain in weight and back fat, if the back fat was 14 to 15 millimeter at day 30, then you should give it 2.3 feed units per sow per day. If you have a small and skinny gilt at mating, for example, if you needed to increase the batch of sows that week, then you want some extra gain in gestation. So you should give it 2.5 to 2.7 feed units per day. So there are a lot of variation, but that is to control both the weight and the back fat of gilts. And the most easiest, I will say more times today, is to have uniform gilts at mating. That will make it more easy further on. The feeding curve day 84 to fairing is 3.5 feed units per day as for sows. So when you have to implement this feeding in your gestation unit, it requires some insight, and I know that different stables and feeding systems require individual solutions. If you have a mating control unit with 1 box per sow, and it was built before 2015, you can do boxing of sows for the first 4 weeks. If you have dry feeding, then you can have individual feeding curves for each sow and adjust the back fat individually. And then when you loosen the sows after day 28, you have hopefully more uniform sows and can feed them all 2.3 feed units per day. If you have liquid feeding, you need to make sure that you have uniform sows per valve and then 1 feeding curve per valve. If you have floor feeding or liquid feeding in long troughs, then it's of course more difficult, and the number of pens per batch will be the important fact for sorting of sows. You may in fact need both to categorize skinny, normal and fat for young sows, and the same for older sows. But again, if you have uniform sows at mating, you may need only 1 pen for young sows and then the 3 categories for the older sows. So that will make it more easy. And it depends on the number of pens you have. And I think we all know that the fat and dominant sows are the most irritating and challenging sows, and you should try to have a strategy. For example, can you take them out of the pen so they will not be challenging for the other sows? If you have 1 box per sow or these opti-pens, and then if they are built before 2015, you can do the same as for the orange box. You can lock them, or you can have them boxed for the first 28 days. If they are newer, you will need to lock them at each feeding, and then of course open again when they are done eating. Then you can, on purpose, if you backfat scan at mating, you can mark up the sows that are skinny, and you will be able to walk through the alley with a feed wagon with some extra feed and see, okay, this sow is skinny, she needs some extra feed. But be aware that this extra feed, if the feeding curve is set to normal, which was 3 feed units in the beginning, she should have 4.5 feed units. It will be around 1.5 kilo per day. That's quite a lot. And this you will be able to do whether it's dry feeding or liquid feeding. If you have electronic sow feeding, there are optional number of feeding curves, and you can change the curve for the individual sow as many times as you have time. So the conclusion on this part is that we recommend 14 to 17 millimeter of backfat at fairing for both gilts and sows. This will give the best possibilities to ensure a maximum productivity and a lower feed consumption and overall a high effectivity. You will have less sows with great losses of body weight and backfat, and more sows with average body condition at all times. You will save 20 to 25 feed units every time a sow does not need to deposit 1 millimeter of backfat. So now we will focus on development in sow body weight. And first of all, I wanted to focus on the maintenance requirement, because why does two sows not react the same way on the same amount of feed? If you think about a car, a big car and a small car, the maintenance requirement is when a car is turned on but it's not driving, then it still requires some amount of gas, and the bigger the car is, the more gas is required. That's the same with the sows. So what goes to performance is for body growth, backfat gain, fetal growth, milk production, and it all comes from the feed that is fed above the maintenance requirement. So when we give a sow, a skinny sow, 4.5 feed unit per day in early gestation, it is highly affected by sow body weight and age, how much backfat is deposited. If it weighs 190 kilo, then less of the feed is used for maintenance and more is used for depositing backfat. So 3.3 millimeter we expect. If a sow, on the other hand, weighs 320, then less is used for depositing backfat, around 2.4 millimeter. So when you think about, why does this sow not gain as much body backfat as this smaller sow, this is why. And in mid-gestation, when we give them 2.3 feed units per day, then the small sow will gain 1 millimeter, but the bigger sow may potentially lose a little bit of backfat. But this is also the very big sows. So here we have the development in sow body weight from first to fifth fairing. It's data from 5 herds. And what we see is that gilt body weight at mating and at fairing is very important. We have the 5 dots at each parity for each of the herds, which illustrates the weight after fairing. And what we see is that they are very parallel, but there is a great difference within each parity group. For first parity, there is from the herd with the lowest weight at first parity to the greatest weight is 35 kilo, and then it varies from 26 to 35 kilo. But as I said, it's parallel, so really it's the weight at mating of the gilt that is important for how big your sows will become. The weight at first service is important for the development in your herd, as I just said. But don't let a high litter size determine the weight at first service. This graph shows total born per litter, and then we have the weight at first service. And what we see is that, okay, total born increase 0.4 per liter for each 10 kilo additional weight at first service. So maybe we should just have some very big gilts. But then when we look at the longevity, given here as the proportion of gilts that were mated in next parity, and then the weight at first service, then we see that the greater weight at first service, less of these gills or sows were mated for second parity. We have also categorized them into lean, or these skinny gills, 6 to 12 millimeters in the middle, and the green, which is the medium, 13 to 15 millimeter, and then the fat, 16 to 29. And when we look at what we recommend, which is 140 to 160 kilo at first service, then litter size is quite good. Longevity is also good, but if you move above and go to in the interval of 160 to 180 at first service, then litter size, yes, it goes up, but longevity goes down. And also we could think about maybe we should just have some very fat gills, but then we should think about the performance also in faring stable. And also we know that more fat gills may also be more bigger and have a more bad longevity. When we look at development in sow body weight in first gestation, what is then the consequence of the feeding curve in mid-gestation when we feed a diet with 4 grams of lysine per feed unit? When I showed you the feeding curves for the gills, I told you that you should vary the feeding curve in mid-gestation between 2 and 2.7 depending on size and body condition. So here we have a gilt that was mated too big at 172 kilo. Then we see that if you give this gilt 2.5 feed units per day, it will have a body growth of 40 kilo. And this is just the body mass. It's without the litter that is in the stomach. And if you give it 2.3, then it will have a body growth of 38 kilo, meaning 2 kilo less. If you give it 2 feed units per day, which would probably be the recommended for such a big gilt at mating, then we could reduce the body growth to 34 kilo, and we would have minus 6 kilo according to giving it the high feeding curve. So this is just to show you what it means that you can, if you have mated a gilt too big, you can control a bit of its growth in gestation using the feeding curve. So the conclusions on this part is that you should keep focusing on gilt body weight and back fat at first service. You should mate the gills in second estrus, 140 to 160 kilo and 13 to 15 millimeter. And the feeding curves in mid-gestation can be used as a tool to reduce the growth of the gills. So if you look at development in sow body weight during gestation, then we look here at the consequences of dietary lysine and protein, both for a gilt that was mated at 150 kilo, the optimal, and then a third parity sow that weighed 234 kilo at mating. If you give both of them 4 grams of digestible lysine per feed unit, and this recommended 2.3 feed units per day in mid-gestation, then in whole gestation the body growth would be for the gilt 38 kilo and for the sow 27 kilo. But if you increase the lysine concentration and think this sow, I want to give the best to my sows and give them some higher lysine, what you get is just a bigger sow, and it has a higher body growth. You can see that the gilt will gain 12 kilo because it fed this 2.3 feed units per day, and less is going to maintenance, so more can be used for growth. If you have a bigger sow, then a little bit less is used for maintenance. A little bit more used for maintenance, so it will gain 6 kilo. So to conclude on this, I recommend you to follow the recommended 4 grams of digestible lysine per feed unit and 90 grams of digestible protein per feed unit. Feeding a high concentration of lysine and protein, it will just result in heavier and more muscular sows. And then extra feed the last 4 weeks before farrowing, it also just increases the sow body weight. We have not been able to show that more than 3.5 feed units increase the piglet birth weight. So there is no need to give them more than 3.5 feed units. It will only, one extra feed unit per day the last 4 to 4.5 weeks before farrowing will just increase sow body weight by 7 to 8 kilo. And the more a sow weighs, more feed is used for maintenance. So that means just a higher amount of feed being used in total. So you have 2 handles to use. The feeding curve in gestation unit and the dietary concentration of lysine and protein. And then there is, of course, some variation with what you can do in the type of stable you have and the type of feeding system you have, and there might be some variation in sows. But what is interesting sometimes is when you look out in the tractors outside, then there is so much precision, and sometimes when you look inside, then there is maybe screwed down on this precision. So this is just to tell you, just to keep focus. So a take-home message, I have a few, and this is to strive for 14 to 17 millimeter of backfat at farrowing for both sows and gilts, and keep this focus on shoulder lesions. If you have any problems in your herd, then maybe it's better to focus on 16 or 17 millimeter than 14. And then we have this new categorization of body condition and weaning. Just remember the numbers when you hopefully go back home and backfat scan the sows, so you will know which feeding curves they should follow. And then, most important, uniform gilts at first service. Made them in second heat at an age of 220, 240 days, backfat of 13 to 15 millimeter, and a weight of 140 to 160 kilo. And then optimize your feed management in gestation unit. Sort out sows and gilts according to body weight, use the correct feeding curves, and backfat scan the sows at mating at day 30, 28, what day fits you, and at farrowing, so you make sure that what you do is actually working. And then avoid this excess lysine and protein during gestation. You will save 6 to 12 kilo of muscle growth in each gestation, and it will be easier for the sows to regain lost backfat. Then we have some new projects coming up. We will keep working on this feeding of gestating sows. Together with Aarhus University, we will look at protein and amino acid requirements in late gestation. And in Fokus, we will look at protein and amino acid requirements in early and mid gestation, and also the energy requirement, the feeding curve in mid gestation. Yeah, that was all from me. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so very much to Camilla. If you have any questions down there in the south, you could write on the chat. But of course also here in Dalum, if you have any questions for Camilla. I think it was a very nice presentation. I have just one question. Of course we have these recommendations, and it's very nice to follow, but I guess to follow these, it's also very important to be aware of the weight of the feed. We need to go out there in the farms to check our sow feed, to weigh 1 liter and 2 liter and 3 liters of feed. I guess you have not been mentioned this, but I think it's very basically and important to feed these very precisely ways. We should also know about our own feed, what is the weight. And 1 liter may weigh something, but it's not that 2 liters weigh the double of 1 liter. You should make a curve 1 liter is this much, 2 liters is this much, and 3 liters is this much. That's important, I think.
Yeah, that's very good point. Thank you.
So, but it seems like there's no questions on the chat, and not here from Dalum as well. So I would say thank you to Camilla here. It was a very nice and interesting presentation, and it's of course, if we can spare some use of feed out there, it's right now very interesting to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then welcome to Anne, my colleague from Porcus. We'll talk about the Backfat scanning. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, Camilla, for a very nice and interesting presentation. And one of the reasons we are having this meeting today, the topic for today, is also about all the work you have been done and the new requirements for Backfat scanning, and it's also one of the reasons why I'm having this presentation today, and it's about to get off to a good start with smart Backfat scanning. And I know many of you already Backfat scan, but we have made, here in Porcus, has made some new tools that you can use out on your farms, so it's easier for you to use the data after you have been scanning. And for the ones of you who doesn't scan yet, then the next couple of months we will all in Porcus, all the veterinarians in Porcus will like you to get started if you want to, and show you how you can scan and everything. But just take a talk with your own veterinarian at your farm. But if we look a little back, the breeding has changed a lot in the last years. We have now a much higher productivity, and all farms do have very great numbers if we look at them. But if we look at the durability of the sows, it has gone in the opposite wrong direction. I will say that we have a very high sow mortality right now. So if we look at the Backfat scanning, it's a very good tool to focus on and work more goal-oriented on the condition and the regulation of the condition of the sows. And as Camilla said, that if we Backfat scan, we will have less deviation in the condition of the sows, we will have better durability of the sows, and also we will have a lower and more constant feed consumption. And as Paul said, the prices of the feed is very, very high now, so where we can save money, and if we can save a lot of money on this, it's a good thing to get started. So correct condition regulation has a very great impact on the output, and then also on the economic of the herd. So if we look here, before we did the classic estimate of condition, and we made it in 4 different categories: skinny, slim, normal, and fat. And then we also made a lot of subjective estimates, and I will say it is subjective. I like this cartoon a lot because there's a big difference in if I look in the mirror or some of my male colleagues as Paul look in the mirror, and they will see some difference when we look. And that's the same when we look at the body condition of the sows. I see differently, but also it can be difficult to see the shape of the sows if you just look by your eyes. So also here before we had some very big muscular sows, as the picture from the right, and as you can see also the legs, they were not. We culled a lot of sows. So now we want more Backfat, and especially on the gills, as Camilla also told you, and I will come back to that also later. Also because we want more and more live born, we have released more eggs if we have more Backfat, but also if the durability of the sows is better if they don't weigh so much when from the beginning. So here, the choice of the scanner, I will say this is a Renko lean meter. I will not say it's the golden standard, but it's a very good scanner. I think most of us veterinarian here in Porcus has this in our car, and it's a very nice one to use. So if you're not started yet, you can tell it to your veterinarian at your farm, and then we can bring it for the next couple of visits, and then we can take it in and scan some sows. And maybe in the future you will buy your own scanner. When you scan, there's for the sows we have 3 layers of backfat. As you see here, there's 3 dots, and when we scan the gills, there's 2 layers of backfat. But the point is also that you use the same scanner, so we don't have any difference from scanner to scanner, but also that it's the same person or the same persons who does it, so we don't have any mistakes there also. So of course we would like also to show you how you scan. We can show it, but also later on if you get new employees at your farm. But this is here you find the last rib. You go up to P2 and then you put some oil on it and then you scan. We can show it on your farm, but there's also a little video here, and I will show it to you today. But you can also find it on Sigit's website if there's some other person in your farm who wants to see it. It's on Danish, but I think most of you understand Danish, but maybe doesn't speak it. Otherwise, I can translate a little. But it's just to show you how you backfat scan. Yeah. I think it will be there in a moment. Yes.
Du finder P2 ved at mærke efter det bagerste punkt på det bagerste ribben. Derfra føres hånden lodret op til rygsøjlen, og derefter 7 cm ud til solens side igen. De 7 cm svarer til bredden af f.eks. linmeterapparatet. En rygspækmåler angiver rygspæktykkelsen i millimeter. Måleren viser, hvor mange fedtlag der måles på. Der er 3 fedtlag på en so. En præcis måling kræver, at alle 3 lag måles. Når du bruger planteolie på målestedet, fås en god kontakt mellem scannerhovedet og huden på soen. Apparatet skal altid holde vinkelret på soens hud og kun trykke let mod huden, ellers får du ikke det rigtige resultat.
Yes, this was how it should be done, and you can find the video in there, otherwise we will guide you to how to do it. Oh. Yeah, I will just move on just a second here. Okay. Yeah, then in Porcus we made some new registration schemes for you. So all the registration you made when you backfat scan, so you better can use it in your farms. Then we made this arc for you. It's an Excel arc where we can. This is a table for the sows where we can put in the dates. We can put the scanning in before weaning, after weaning, 4 weeks after mating, and before farrowing. This is the 3 times we want to backfat scan the sows. And then we also have a table for the gilts, where we want to scan them when we start ultrasyn at insemination, and also before 4 weeks after mating. Then we registrate it in the scheme. We put in the numbers of the sows. We put in the backfat numbers of the sows. And then down here we can have the different, for example, the different week numbers. And then here we find the results. So we can get some graphs out of this. This is just put in the different groups. Here we have the skinny ones, how many sows there's in the skinny groups from week to week, and the middle group and the fat group. And the lowest line is the average of the backfat. And then we can take out some nice graphs where we put in different colors. We said that red is the skinny ones, green is the middle one, and blue is the fat one. And we chose these colors because this is what you use of spray, I think, in your farms. So just visually, so you can see it on the sows, and we use the same here in the graphs. So then from week to week, you can see how many sows there's in each group, and the line here is the average of the Backfat. So for example, here in the last group, you can see the average is 14. So, and these can be printed out, so you could have it in the farms, and you can also use it for all the next visits, veterinarian, when the veterinarian comes, you can take it out here and you can talk about it and which changes has to be done. These registration schemes, all the veterinarians in Porcus has these on their computer, so you can have it on your farm and put in your own data. So also we made also this table out from Camilla and Sigge's new recommendations. So this is again the same colors here. We have the red color is the skinny ones, the green one is the middle, and blue one is the fat ones. And the first line going down is the Backfat at weaning. And then the next box, we can see how many feed units they has to be given the first 4 weeks after insemination. It was some of all the numbers that Camilla presented, but we just made it out here and put it together. And this, we made it for sows, and we also made it for gills and first parity sows. So, and we made it in Danish and we made it in English. So you can print it out, this one out, and put it up in your farms in different places, so all of you know which Backfat curve we are following and how much the sows has to be given in feed. This is also some schemes that the veterinarian has, so you can also receive this on the next visit. But we have to remember that we have to follow up on what we do on the individual groups. Are we moving the skinny ones up in the middle group, and etc. Because there can, of course, as Camilla said, be some difference in the feeding systems and how it's possible at your farm. So we have to follow up all the time. And this is just the table for the gills and the first parity sows. So, but it all begins with the gills. We heard about that earlier on today also, and we want to avoid this. This is, I think you can see some very big gills. They were too big in weight and also too big in age before they are getting inseminated. So it's important that we control the weight and the age of the gills. And it's very important that we buy in the right number of gills and also in the correct age groups. So what we also have to look about is the feeding of the gills. The optimal way will be that we feed them with two different mixtures in the quarantine. So one mixture from 30 to 65 kilo and one mixture from 65 to 110 kilo. We want to have a lower growth on the gills. It's not the same as the slaughter pigs. We want to have a good health in the gut, and we also have a good durability. And when we go from 110 to insemination, we want to put more Backfat on the animals. So this is just an example from a quarantine stable where we have 2 strings feeding systems. We have restrictive feeding and feeding on the floor. But I know that it's often the feeding system that is the limiting factor. So then we have to find out some changes maybe in the mixture or some changes in the feed, but also some supplement to be given manually or anything to feed the gills correctly, so we have the right Backfat at insemination. And what we also have to think about is the flow of the gills in the quarantine. And the size of the quarantine is a factor that we have to think about. But also the number of the gills and the weight in the quarantine, but also the weight out of the quarantine. and also how different we have in the ages of the gilts. So can we maybe order some gilts that's a little larger in size, so it's more easy for us to fulfill their needs? That could also be a thought. I think many of you also heat synchronization, and I think there's a great advantage in this, because then we know when to inseminate them, and therefore we can feed them more precisely by condition. And when we begin the synchronization, we recommend them to be 11 to 12 millimeter. And when we inseminate it, we want them to be 14 to 15 millimeter in backfat. And now to some cases. At one farm, we had in the quarantine only one mixture for the gilts. And the smallest gilts, they get too skinny, they will get poor started. And then we try to give some supplement with some soya protein only for the smallest gilts, around 20 to 40 kilo. We gave it manually, but you can of course buy a big bag, but you can of course also install an extra silo, but it's more expensive. So we did it manually here. And then we could, by giving this, we could raise up the protein, the digestible protein level, but also the digestible lysine. And when we have the smallest gilts, they need to have more than the bigger ones. So this was one of the solutions we did in one farm. Then we also have, at one farm, gilts was too skinny or too slim at insemination. And what we can do, and we do in some farms, we give them candy. And as you see here, it's a big bag with candy, and just be aware of it tastes quite good, so just be aware of your own backfat. No. But the thing is that you can give them 300 grams of sweets per day, and this will increase the backfat of the gilts around 3 millimeter. It's a rule of thumb. There can be some difference in farm to farm, and there can also be difference in how long time or how much we give. But this is a good supplement to raise the backfat before mating. Of course, we looked at the protein and lysine levels in the feeding, but this was that they were correctly, but this was a supplement here. And this is just some numbers that shows this is the backfat before we gave the sweet, and it was around 11 millimeters when mating. And when we gave them sweets, it raised with 2 millimeters to 13. Of course, we want to go a little higher, but then we can supplement with a little more candy. But just to show you that this is one solution to do it better with the gilts. This is another farm where we know that the gilts they are more likely to tail bite than the rest, and we also the restrictive feeding. So we had tail bite in this farm, and then we found a solution that you can see this extra feeding box that's here in the middle. We gave them some crushed beet pellets or some straw pellets extra, around 600 grams per day, and then actually we got the tail bite to stop. But now we go back to the sows, because we do see fat sows at fairing, but what to do then? Of course, we want to avoid this because we want to take care of the gilts and inseminate in the correct condition, and then follow the right feeding curves. Then we could avoid this by doing this. But if we have a fat sow, I will say the only place where it can lose weight is in the fairing stable, and then we recommend to give them only 7 to 8 feed units per day, so she can take out of the body condition instead. And if we have skinny sows at weaning, then the backfat scanning is very good to categorize and put them in groups. And when we have them in the control stable, we can put them together and feed them individually, as Camilla was talking about early on. And then maybe we could put here the colors, the red colors here, that so everybody knows that these skinny ones should have extra feed, and we have to look, are they regaining extra back fat in the 4 weeks period? And then hopefully they will go back to the normal group. And just to show you that this is again using this this scheme here, and maybe you have it also in the løbekontrol stable, and every people in the stable knows which curve they should be on then. So recently, for some months ago, we launched this Porcus Survivor. We were talking about that also on a Fokus FEMA 35 meeting. So backfat scanning and condition regulation is definitely one of the things to lowering the mortality of the sows. And I just took this graph as Camilla showed us earlier on today, but I think it's a good thing to repeat again, that if you inseminate the gilts too heavy for the first time, the chances of them being inseminated again is lowering. So we like not them to be too big, but in the right interval. And also here it's an older graph, but I think it's still working and still actual. But here we see that if we inseminate the gilts with too low backfat or too fat backfat, the chances of them being going to be a 4 liter sows is lower than if we inseminate in the correct backfat. And here also again, if we have too skinny sows or too big sows, we are more likely to kill them than if we lay in the middle. So all of this about backfat scanning and backfat, correct backfat, is very important. So this was all for me, but I will say that Porcus want to help you get started with this if you're not already started or starting to use the new recommendation and using the new scheme. So just talk to your own Porcus veterinarian, and in the next visit they will help you get started. So yeah, that's all for me.
Yeah, thank you to Anne for a very nice presentation. Do we have any questions from here from Dalum? And again from South, you can use your phone and chat to me, and I will send the question further on to Anne. I think it's very interesting, this area, and we have a great opportunity to try to lower the sow mortality in the farms by focusing on this feeding both of the gilts and the poults, and of course the sows as well. So need to get started with the back fat scanning. It's just get started. Yeah, I can see no questions from South, and I would say thank you from here from Dalum, and thank you for joining the meeting, both here and in the South and in the West. Hopefully you will bring these informations home and use it back home on the farms. And next time you have the visit from vet, please grab by the neck and talk about these backfat scannings again. It's a very important area. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for today.